Welcome back to some more Physiology Madness with Dr. H. Today we are going to be talking about growth hormone. Growth hormone is going to be a hormone that is secreted from the anterior pituitary, and it's going to be interacting with a whole bunch of really interesting cells throughout the body to do exactly as the name might imply. Growth hormone is designed to help us grow. It's a building hormone, often known as, in general, an anabolic hormone. It's a tissue building hormone. So, in order to be able to understand growth hormone function, I find that the best way to learn this, to study this, is to draw it out as a flowchart. And to draw out any of my hormones, what do I need to do? I need to look at homeostasis. Just like if I was looking at pretty much any chemical in the body or any function of the body, I would say, what stimuli are going to cause the release of growth hormone? These stimuli are going to be acting on which sensory receptors that's going to instigate this pathway for the release of growth hormone. What control centers are going to be involved in the release of growth hormone? If it was another hormone, there might be another control center. It won't be really the case here for growth hormone. Well, that's not exactly true. There will be, you'll see. Because the sensory receptors are going to be found in the hypothalamus. Finally, down here, we always want to say, where are the targets for this particular hormone or chemical, and what makes a target cell a target cell? If you've listened to pretty much any of my videos before this, you'll know that a target cell always has a receptor for the chemical. So target cells with their receptors are going to create a response, and that response is always going to try to compensate for the original stimulus. So whatever the original stimulus is, the compensatory response is going to be trying to do the opposite of that. So that's sweet. How does this help us? Well, what if we were to walk through and start writing down what the stimuli are for growth hormone release? And what if I said one of the stimuli for growth hormone release, one of the more powerful stimuli for growth hormone release is a decrease in blood glucose levels. We're going to write that down. There's a decrease in glucose in the blood. We can also just call this BGL. BGL. So there's a decrease in the blood glucose levels. Well, when we say this, the nice thing about talking about the compensatory response here at the beginning is, what do we know one of the functions of growth hormone is going to be? Well, if the stimulus is a decrease in blood glucose, then one of the compensatory responses is going to do the opposite. So one of the responses is going to try to increase blood glucose. Hope that makes sense. So now let's start listing some of these other stimuli for growth hormone release. Another powerful stimulus is a decrease in fatty acids. Okay, fatty acids. Fatty acids derive from fats. We can call these FAs or free fatty acids, often FFAs. These are found in the bloodstream. So again, if the stimulus is a decrease in fatty acids, then the compensatory response is going to be to try to increase the number of fatty acids. Another powerful stimulus for growth hormone release is exercise. Exercise, exercise, exercise. Because what do we want to do? Exercise is going to increase blood glucose levels, increase fatty acid in the blood levels, and it's going to help us grow. Another powerful stimulus is age. The younger we are, the more growth we will have. The older we are, we're going to start losing the ability to secrete growth hormone in general. Other things, healthy stress. Just little stressors that are healthy, not chronic depression stress, not that sort of stuff, just regular healthy stress. Although there are some other things that can cause the release of growth hormone, we'll kind of focus in on just two more things. There is a function in which if there's an increase in amino acids in the blood, growth hormone will be secreted. So stimulus is a short-term increase in amino acids, AA, okay, the amino acids in the blood. So you know that one of the compensatory responses is going to be to try to get those amino acids out of the blood. But in addition, more chronic, long-term, there's actually going to be when you get hungry. So it's kind of the opposite. As amino acids start to tank, that can actually cause the secretion of growth hormone as well. And one of the factors that we know is going to be driving growth hormone release is a hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin is secreted from the stomach, and it's secreted when you are hungry, when your stomach is empty. Ghrelin is secreted from an empty stomach. As that stomach gets emptier and emptier and emptier, you're going to get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. And typically right before a meal, that's when ghrelin is at its highest. And growth hormone is going to be secreted during this period of time. Next, we're going to say the stimuli are going to act on sensory receptors. These sensory receptors are therefore going to talk to a control center that's going to end up causing the release of growth hormone in the long run. So where are, in general, these sensory receptors found? The sensory receptors for all of these stimuli are found in the hypothalamus. They're found in the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus, if you recall, there's a hypothalamic pituitary axis. The hypothalamus is going to be attached to the pituitary gland. There's both the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. In this particular flowchart, the hypothalamus now is going to send a signal, and that signal is going to go down and talk to the anterior pituitary. What is that signal that is going to be released from the hypothalamus? It's actually going to be a hormone. And it's going to go into that primary plexus, that first capillary bed, that is going to send that hormone down to the anterior pituitary. What is that hormone released from the hypothalamus that gets into the bloodstream and communicates with the anterior pituitary? It's just growth hormone releasing hormone. GHRH. So GHRH, that goes into that portal system, gets portaled down to the anterior pituitary, and what makes a target cell a target cell? The anterior pituitary has receptors for GHRH. And in response, this control center of the anterior pituitary, not the first control center because that's the hypothalamus, that's where the sensory receptors are found. The second control center is the anterior pituitary. That thing now is going to secrete a hormone in response as well. Well, this is GHRH, so growth hormone releasing hormone. So what hormone is now going to be released from the anterior pituitary? It's going to be growth hormone. So now we have growth hormone. And growth hormone is secreted where? It's getting secreted into the blood. Growth hormone is in the bloodstream. So where does it go from here? What are the target cells that are going to help create a compensatory response? That's what we need to be listening. So growth hormone is going to go a number of places. One of the first places that it's going to go to, we're going to draw an arrow, and this arrow is going to go up to the liver. The liver, I always call the bridesmaid. It's always the bridesmaid, never the bride, because the liver plays such a huge role in so many things and just doesn't get a lot of credit for it. So in this particular case, the liver is going to be activated by growth hormone. There's growth hormone receptors in there. And what is the liver going to do in response? Well, the first thing the liver is going to do that we need to know about is that the liver is going to release another, in essence, it's a hormone in response. It's a protein that is going to be able to enhance growth. It's a growth promoting protein. This particular protein is called insulin growth factor. It's technically insulin-like, growth factor. And that's kind of an important distinction because it's not insulin. And we found quite a few different insulin-like growth factors that are through the body. There's going to be a specific one released by the presence of growth hormone, and it's insulin-like growth factor 1. Insulin-like growth factor 1, and we're going to abbreviate this as IGF-1. So the first things first, when growth hormone gets secreted into the blood, it's going to go to the liver, and the liver in return, or I guess the liver in response, is going to secrete IGF-1. Now, IGF-1 has many, many different functions in the human body. We kind of need to be able to now talk about growth hormone function and IGF-1 function at the same time, because these are going to be happening synonymously. So let's go ahead and talk about the first location where we're going to have receptors now for both growth hormone and IGF-1. And that location will be, let's start with the bones. It doesn't really matter where we start with. In the bones, if you recall, the bones are made up of two major types of cells, osteoblasts and osteoclasts, that help with building bone and breaking bone down. So what if I told you that IGF-1 is a very powerful promoter of osteoblast function? That tells you now that osteoblasts are going to be building bone. So IGF-1 comes down to the bones, and IGF-1 is going to be promoting osteoblast function. So osteoblasts get activated, and that helps us build new bone. But we don't want to just build new bone, because that would just make bone thicker and thicker and thicker and bigger and bigger and bigger. At the same time, we also want to promote the old bone getting broken down. So this is also going to promote osteoclast function. Not only is it building bone up, but it's going to break down the old bone so the bone can get thicker. The bone can get bigger without getting too thick. But ultimately, the one that is going to be elevated more than the others is osteoblasts. You'll see growth hormone also plays a small role in this as well. What else is happening inside of these bones? As bones grow, they don't just need new calcified bone. They need other things as well, like new collagen. Collagen helps hold these bones together. So now if we have more collagen, and specifically it's collagen type 1, and other things like proteoglycans, that's how you spell proteo, proteoglycans, then we're going to end up with the organic part of bone also growing. Bones in the presence of IGF-1, and you guys are going to see also the presence of growth hormone. It's going to help to enhance all these functions as well. Is going to be, for instance, the growth of the width of the bone specifically, which maybe you recall is called endochondral ossification. And also the length of the bones, which if you recall is called interstitial growth. So now growth of bones is both bigger in width and longer in length, which, especially in a kid, it's pretty important to be getting bigger bones to be able to support your body. Awesome. So what else is going on here? Hopefully I have enough room for everything. Insulin-like growth factor. This is also going to be going to places like your skeletal muscles. So let's go ahead and have a spot here for skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles. So IGF-1 is also going to act on skeletal muscles. And in addition, growth hormone will as well. Growth hormone is going to do something slightly different on skeletal muscles than insulin-like growth factor. So let's start with our IGF-1 function in our skeletal muscles. And one of the primary things that IGF-1 is going to be enhancing is going to be protein synthesis and cell division. So protein synthesis. Skeletal muscles are made out of lots of different type of proteins. And so now if we start making new proteins, we're going to be building bigger muscles. The cells are going to be dividing. New cells are going to be made. Lots of cool things are happening with IGF-1 in skeletal muscles. Let's get bigger muscles and more of them. But what do we need in order to synthesize new proteins? Well, proteins are made out of amino acids. And amino acids, if you recall, in amino acids in the blood was one of the stimuli for growth hormone. So as new muscles are getting synthesized, as new proteins are being synthesized, in addition, we need amino acids to help with that function. So we're going to take the amino acids out of the blood and we're going to start to pour those amino acids into the muscle cells. By the way, all cells of the body are going to enhance the amount of amino acids that are going into them. And this is called amino acid uptake. So this is going to be enhancing amino acid uptake into all of these muscles and other cells as well. At the same time, there's going to be something interesting that happens. We are not only uptaking more amino acids, but we are going to start to decrease the number of glucose molecules that go into our skeletal muscles. It's called a decrease in glucose uptake. And what this is it's sparing glucose for the rest of the body. It's sparing glucose for your brain, for instance, because if we're in a state of starvation or exercise, we want a lot of glucose going to be, we need it spared, especially for places like the brain. Some of this glucose is still going into the skeletal muscles. I'm not saying it completely stops. It just decreases the overall glucose uptake. And it's one of the reasons why growth hormone is known as an anti-insulin effect. It has an anti-insulin effect because insulin's role is to enhance glucose uptake. It's going to take glucose from the blood and put it into the skeletal muscles. Whereas growth hormone is stopping that insulin function. It's stopping glucose uptake into those skeletal muscle cells. So it's the opposite. All right. These, by the way, are primarily driven by growth hormone. The last one that we will discuss, although it's by far, it's not the only other target for growth hormone. In fact, growth hormone, well, every cell in the human body, literally every cell in the human body has receptors for growth hormone. The last one we'll end up talking about here on our list is fat cells, adipose tissue. So we'll go over here and we'll write adipose. This is going to be a target cell. Fat cells. And what ends up happening is in response to, actually primarily the growth hormone is going to be acting on here. So this growth hormone is going to go down to these fatty tissues. And what do we know one of the stimulus is? A decrease in fatty acids. We're not done, by the way. We got to come back over here to the liver. But what do we know about this adipose tissue? Is that this adipose tissue is a storage place for fats, triglycerides to be more specific. And triglycerides is a glycerol in 3 fatty acids. It's triglyceride, it's got 3 fatty acids. So here in our adipose tissue, we have a lot of stored fatty acids. So if the stimulus is a decrease in fatty acids in the blood, we know that the compensatory response should be to increase fatty acids in the blood. So what is growth hormone going to do? It's going to help break down fats. This process is called lipolysis. Lipolysis, which means to break down fat. It's actually going to be inhibiting lipogenesis. It wants to stop the formation of new fat, and it wants to break down fat. And as I break down this fat, I'm going to be releasing fatty acids into the blood. So as I break down this fat, that's going to increase the number of free fatty acids in the blood, which is exactly what we wanted. It's the opposite of the stimulus. By the way, if we stop glucose uptake, if we blocked glucose uptake over here, what's going to be a result of blocking glucose uptake? There's going to be less glucose going into our skeletal muscles, and this is going to be trying to attempt to increase those blood glucose levels. Okay? It's a compensation. If the stimulus is a decrease in blood glucose levels, we're going to be trying to increase those blood glucose levels. Last but not least, not only are we releasing free fatty acids over here in the blood from the adipose tissue, but we're also going to be releasing glycerol. I mentioned those. So now we're also releasing glycerol. Monoglycerides and single glycerols. Now, these glycerols have a function. It's not the end of the road for these glycerols. These glycerols now are going to go into the bloodstream, and they travel all the way back to the liver. Now we're back in the liver. Glycerol enters the liver, and now glycerol is going to get converted. What does it get converted into? Glucose. The liver can biochemically convert glycerol into glucose. This function has a name. It's called gluconeogenesis, meaning new, genesis. If I take something that was not glucose and I convert it into glucose, this is called gluconeogenesis. So a property of growth hormone is now to help enhance gluconeogenesis of glycerol. A property of growth hormone is to enhance gluconeogenesis of glycerol. We're converting glycerol into glucose. What is that going to end up resulting in? An increase in blood glucose levels. Not only did we spare glucose from going into skeletal muscles, but now we're enhancing the numbers of glucose that are being released by the liver. We're not done yet, because the liver also stores glycogen. And glycogen is just big, long chains of glucose. It's stored glucose. What is glycogen? It's stored glucose. So if I take glycogen and I break the glycogen down, if I take glycogen and I lysis it, glycogenolysis, lysis meaning to break down glycogen. If I take glycogen, which is stored glucose, and I break it down, what am I going to be releasing even more of? Glucose. And what is that going to do? It's also going to be attempting to increase your blood glucose levels. Summary. Growth hormone has many different stimuli. A decrease in blood glucose levels, decrease in free fatty acids in the blood, exercise, age, healthy stress, increase in amino acids in the blood, and then hunger, ghrelin, as that stomach starts to shrinky-dink down. What that's going to stimulate ultimately is the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is going to secrete GHRH. In turn, the GHRH goes to the anterior pituitary, causing it to secrete growth hormone. Growth hormone enters the blood. Blood goes everywhere. One of the locations the blood goes to is the liver, and the liver is going to secrete IGF-1 in response. IGF-1 is a powerful growth stimulator. It's an anabolic hormone that's going to go around and try to build things. Bones, skeletal muscle, two really, really potent places for IGF-1 to go to, but it also goes to all the other cells in the body, helping with cellular division, cellular repair, cellular differentiation. It's not just bones and skeletal muscles, that's what we put on here. In bones, it's going to increase bone growth, both in width and also in length. In skeletal muscles, it's going to try to make new muscles, but not at the expense of glucose. Growth hormone and insulin-like growth factor are both going to end up also acting on adipose tissue, but the primary one is growth hormone. Direct effect of growth hormone is to cause lipolysis. And as I break down fats, I'm going to be releasing free fatty acids in the blood, countering the original stimulus, and I'm releasing glycerol. The glycerol goes all the way back to the liver, where it's converted into glucose by gluconeogenesis, trying to enhance blood glucose levels, doing the opposite of the original stimulus. In addition, the growth hormone and the insulin-like growth factor act together to cause glycogenolysis, thus releasing more glucose from the liver, trying to bring those blood glucose levels back up again. I hope this was a good summary of growth hormone function. See you in the next video. Humankind, be bold.